So here's another example of the more ethnographically rich of the illness caused by magic works. So let's just look at this paragraph, the one that begins here. Again, this highlighter thing isn't really that good, but that's the one, okay. So the magic of many peoples of rude culture, okay, so there's another one of his ethnocentric terms, rude culture, which in a way means simple culture, including those of the area with which I especially deal, differs widely from this in that disease or injury is in many cases ascribed to purely human agency, even when to us the real cause of a condition would seem to be obvious. This mode of causation is not merely brought into play to explain cases of illness which have no obvious antecedent, but also those in which what we should call the natural cause is obvious. Thus, if a man is killed or injured by falling from a tree on the island of Ambrym in the New Hebrides, so that's in Melanesia, the fall is not ascribed to a loose branch or to some failure of coordination of the movements of the climber, but the accident is, as we loosely call it, is put to the account of the sorcerer. It is probable that the sequence of ideas in the Melanesian mind is that in a business so familiar as that of climbing trees, accidents would not happen unless someone has interfered with the normal course of events. So he's trying to briefly explain the logic of magic. There's another anthropologist, Evans Pritchard, has a terrific early ethnography from the 1930s called Witchcraft, Magic, and Oracles Among the Azande, based on fieldwork in southern Africa. And there are famous examples in that book of how he the anthropologist from England, learned to understand the logic of witchcraft. And he learned also, Rivers doesn't quite go this far here, but Evans Pritchard says, the logic of witchcraft does not exclude natural causes. As an example, he mentions, there are these grain storage areas in these Azande villages that are kept off the ground by these wooden posts so that animals don't get into the grain. And sometimes people sit underneath them in the daytime because of the shade. And he mentions, an accident where one of the granaries fell. One of the supports broke and fell and injured people underneath there. And he explains that if upon inspection, they learned that termites had eaten out the base of some of the posts. Okay, now, but that's the natural explanation. He says Azande thought does not conflict with natural causes, but witchcraft explains why it was those people sitting at the moment that the structure gave way because of termite erosion, and not some other people, or why there was somebody there and not nobody. And he made this basic point that this only explains, why me. It doesn't disregard natural causes. People don't imagine that the witch has suddenly magically caused the post to break. This all happens by nature. So several anthropologists tried to get the Western audience to understand these ideas that sound very strange as actually being quite rational. I mean, in the modern perspective is that this just happens by accident, by coincidence. But those explanations have no meaning. It just happened, But if it's caused by somebody sent it, it means there's some social meaning. Then maybe there's some resentment, and that's true around the world. That people are. I'm sure you have seen this in Kerala, right? You worry about like some jealousies or rivalries, whether that might send some negative influence. In a way, I would say it's in modern capitalism that makes us stop thinking this way. We just individualize events as just happening to a particular person with no particular connection to the social network. Anyway, I just wanted, just going over briefly some highlights from that reading, which in many ways is very basic. It was just significant because he's the first person to really look at some of these beliefs. Let me jump to Levi-Strauss. This Sorcerer and His Magic. So this is from 1963. This is still an early work. This is also written before there was anything called medical anthropology. But what he's doing is of interest to medical anthropologists. So the author is Claude Levi-Strauss, and you guys know because you have the syllabus, but I'll just put his name up here for those online. So this is the author we're talking about, Claude Levi-Strauss. How many of you have heard of him already before? Like a show of hands, so a few of you. Okay, more than that. I mean, he's arguably the most famous anthropologist ever. He's a French anthropologist. I'm not going to go into what he studied. He studied lots of things, especially myths. And this article that I gave you is from a collection of his works from the 1960s. And he's using his own experience, his own fieldwork he did with indigenous peoples in Brazil. The Nambiquara are mentioned in one of the examples. And he's also giving you an example based on the fieldwork of Franz Boas, who's you know, a very famous early anthropologist too, who's an American, well, a German person, but living and working in the US at Columbia University. And I asked, I mean, you probably get a message about the reading that I sent through Sudarshan and maybe Nazmia about this, that you should focus on the second example of Queselid. I mean, because the article is very dense and can be very confusing. That's the thing about Levi-Strauss, very provocative, but many people, you know, you'll read one of his articles on mythology. He'll be presenting 4 myths, and you're able to follow him for the first 3, and the 4th one, your mind just kind of, I don't understand what your logic anymore. And so the first example, if you read some of that, maybe it was just confusing about this person who claims he was taken away in a storm up to heaven and brought back. Or then there's another example of a Zuni boy. Zuni is Native North American group of people, and he's accused of witchcraft, and he realizes he can't deny witchcraft and he can't say that it's not real in his defense. I mean, that point I think is understandable. It's not really perhaps clear what he's doing with that example, but I think the one about Queselid, the shaman, is the most useful and relatable. And I'm putting this up here because in this example, actually, Levi-Strauss is using an example from the work of Franz Boas. That, you know, this is not a case that Levi-Strauss himself saw, but this is from but Boas did some of the earliest ethnographies, you know, like the 1890s. And Queselid is among the Northwest Coast group of Native Americans. So this is like on the border of Canada and the US, around Seattle and Vancouver. These were the indigenous peoples of that place, and the Queselid is from that area. And Queselid is, as Levi-Strauss says, he's skeptical about shamanism and mystical healing. And he wants to expose it as a fraud. Now, in this reading, Levi-Strauss doesn't tell you all the details about Caselid, but he's actually, Caselid is half white, half Native American, so he's been raised with both cultures. He's been raised with the modern scientific skepticism of the Euro-American culture. And he believes his society's own shamans are charlatans, and he wants to expose them. But let me invite you to be more involved with this. What does Caselid find, though, when he tries to learn shamanism and he tries to expose it? Yeah. Uh-huh.
It's a very basic question. You mentioned that in that he tries to expose. So he goes to that place and he says that there is a tuft of down in his mouth, which he spits out, like wasn't bleeding. Down means feathers.
Yeah, right. That's right. Yeah, sort of like those very soft inner feathers. Yeah. Yeah, he learns that technique. What does he learn about effectiveness and whether treatments are real or not? Yeah.
He didn't feel that it was not believing him, but in the end, in order to save himself, he actually resorted to this. So he's not actually believing in it, but he found that ultimately to protect himself, that is the one which comes his help.
To protect himself?
That is, they told him he is a sorcerer, so he wanted to say that because he is not that, so he used this example. Like he's finding, like he's got power because of this, and people are believing that.
Okay, that he's got. Are you talking about the Zuni boy, maybe, or Caselid? Because there's a few cases. I think what you're talking about is the Zuni boy, and his defense in the. But then I'm thinking of Caselid, the shaman sorcerer who learns the techniques. Does anybody have any? Do you have any insights in that?
I found that when he met with other culture,
Yeah.
the other communities who had a different shaman,
Mm-hmm.
they didn't have the same technique because they didn't use the tuft and there was
Right.
nothing.
Yes.
And there was no material. So
Right.
they just used the spit or something like that.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And Caselid was like, he got, this is my
Yeah.
interpretation,
Mm-hmm.
that he got confused because the other shamans were not able to cure the person. And Caselid, even though he didn't believe in his own thing and he was questioning himself, he was able, like the person said that they were cured. So I think he started questioning like why it's happening. Maybe it's the patient's belief in himself, or this is something that is all. That was my
Yeah. Well, and I'm just looking for your interpretation. You had that I think important point where you said even though he didn't believe in it, it was helping people, which I think is a really important point. Yeah.
So even though there was like a conscious deception from his side,
Yeah.
it really didn't negate the system's effectiveness in a sense.
Right. Exactly. In other words, it didn't matter that it wasn't real, quote unquote, in inverted quotes. He.
in a way acted like a placebo, maybe in today's terms.
That could be a good way of explaining it in today's terms. Yeah, exactly. And maybe the placebo is more powerful if you have like the bloody tuft as opposed to the other tribe you mentioned that would just spit. Like if you see the bloody thing, it may have more suggestive power.
Of the body, and it's a worm that was affecting you, so it is more believable that it is there.
Right. It's more believable. It's more powerful performance. Well, I mean, the important insight is that it's sort of the idea of true and false, don't always help understand the effectiveness of therapy. That many people looking at other forms of treatment think in terms of like rationality and what is real and what is imagined. But what's important sometimes is just the performance. The reality is whatever the performance is creating, and a convincing one may have some valuable effects. Let me just look at how Levi-Strauss said that. Let's see, 170.
He did not become a great shaman because he cured his patients, but he cured his patients because he became a great.
Exactly right. Because of the reputation of being a great shaman, that had a curative power on the patients. Let's see, 176, am I looking for 75? No, 76. Oh, this is, Oh, it's a different version of my laptop. I had highlighted on it. So, oh, did I go too far? Yeah. Okay, zooming in a little bit for. So he describes how he did his bloody worm spitting into his hands, and then how it seemed to be better than the method the other tribe uses of just spitting. In fact, he asks regarding the other tribe's method, what is the value of this method? You know, what is the theory behind it in order to find out the strength of the shamans, whether it was real or whether they only pretended to be shamans like his fellow tribesmen. Queselid requests and obtains permission to try his method in an instance where the Koskimo method has failed. And the sick woman then declares herself cured. And here our hero vacillates for the first time. Though he had few illusions about his own technique, he has now found one which is more false, more mystifying, and more dishonest than his own. For he at least gives the client something. He presents them with their sickness in a visible and tangible form, while his foreign colleagues show nothing at all and only claim to have captured the sickness. Moreover, Queselid's method gets results while the other is futile. Thus our hero grapples with a problem which perhaps is parallel in the development of modern science. Two systems, which we know to be inadequate, present a differential validity from both a logical and an empirical perspective. From which frame of reference shall we judge them? On the level of fact, where they merge, or on their own level, where they take on different values, both theoretically and empirically? So let's move on to, and there's other stuff he goes on about, and Levi-Strauss does, I'm not covering. Just one other thing to mention that he does say a few times that very important in this belief system is these three parts. He mentions these three parts several times. The healer, the shaman's belief in their own power, the patient's belief in the shaman's power, and the culture's belief in the system. That you need like all three parts to be present to work. In fact, they can be suffocated and there can be no outside of that system, which is one of the things he's showing with the Zuni boy, who has no way of defending himself against witchcraft accusations. So this other article I have assigned is by a Dr. David Goldfarb, who is a friend of mine, lives in my suburb of New York, and he's a nephrologist, kidney expert. And I was talking to him once. We often have conversations because he's interested in my perspective in medical anthropology. I'm interested in his perspective as a physician. And he told me he'd been wanting to write about this patient. And he had read an article in college by Levi-Strauss about some healer that he wanted to try to find again because it gave him some idea. And so I gave him this article that you read and said, is it this one? The Sorcerer and His Magic? And he read it, he said, yeah, that's it, okay. So he, as you see in the first paragraph, he's actually quoting that article. The shaman hides a little tuft of down in the corner of his mouth and throws it up, etc. And he's using this to help understand this patient that he has. So this is contemporary nephrology in New York City. Okay, he's Dr. Goldfarb is a kidney stone specialist. He's had many patients with kidney stones. He tells you about the urologist who uses a laser surgery to break up stones. So let me know your insights on this piece. Do you see how this relates to the shaman the shaman's experience? Does anybody want to
It's
offer?
very similar actually because there was something material in
Mhm.
the treatment thing where the duct is not
Right.
around.
Uh-huh.
And in this case where Patty is shown the story, even though the doctor tries to tell her that it's very small
Yeah.
and it's so insignificant that it doesn't really cause anything, it's not supposed to cause anything, but it does for her. But I think from previous experience, she has had an experience with a kidney.
She's had a real quote-unquote kidney stone, yeah,
And
before.
it got me thinking like maybe it was like the pain kind of maybe reminded her of the previous experience and that's why that thing,
Uh-huh.
she's so obsessed with the idea that I have this thing.
Okay.
Or the doctor doesn't find any relevance. But when she's presented with the smallest stone or some after the treatment, just like the tuft coming out, the kidney stone once it's out, she feels relief. Just like the patient from the shaman.
Okay, right. She still felt relief, even though, according to the experts, there could not be any pain. Yeah, exactly.
And the shaman is happy that the patient is cured, the doctor is also happy and he gets the material.
Right. The fact that it's real is less important than the fact that it worked.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. And any other insights or elaborations on this case?
So I have a doubt.
Yeah.
Did the doctor actually perform the surgery or he just pretended to perform in this?
No, they actually performed, not the Dr. Goldfarb, but the urologist, because the urologist does the surgery. You know, Goldfarb was able to convince the urologist to do the procedure. And so they actually did, yeah. He said he took the laser out, he zapped a little tiny fleck. You know, in a way, maybe the surgery was simply like shamanistic performance. You know, but so it was actually done, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So if I may ask then, if he was being not a rational scientist,
Uh-huh.
but the vitalistic shaman,
Yeah.
you mentioned in us, why could he have just taken the patient into the OP, pretended to have done all that surgery, got her out, and then see if she responds?
Well, yeah, that's maybe they could have done that. Yeah, that's a good question. But maybe they, I don't know what they're thinking. I mean, I'm imagining maybe they would be, you know, afraid that their subterfuge would be exposed. They would realize, you know, it may not be a real surgery, but they also were telling the truth. They actually did the surgery. You know, they weren't lying to her. Maybe they would feel some guilt about lying. So I don't know. That's a good question. They could have just dramatized and pretended, but they actually did it. And maybe they were thinking, you know, they actually, so the little fleck is visible on the X-ray. I mean, this is a picture of it. It's not good resolution, so you can't see anything. So I guess theoretically, she could have seen a post-operative X-ray that would reveal they did nothing, and then there may have been a betrayal of the relationships there. So, and he had Dr. Goldfarb, you know, and he wrote this. He got some criticism from other doctors, like saying, "No, you shouldn't do unnecessary surgery, you know, since it's only in her mind." But he also had, you know, his own doubts. You know, as an expert in kidney stones, he felt like there's no way that fleck could be causing pain, but how does he know for sure? You know, he says that in the article. I had my own doubts about maybe, you know, they don't know everything, and pain is hard to measure. You can only have the subjective experience. You have these scales. You know, how much pain are you experiencing from 1 to 10? I mean, one person may say 3, another person may say 7 for the same experience. And so there's no way to know whether her suffering is real, ultimately. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So one more question.
Yeah.
Regarding the suffering.
Yeah.
My question is, why doesn't the doctor take the pain of the Kingsley seriously? Why does he say it's only psychological, and why doesn't he trust when she says she has pain?
Well,
And it appears as if I'm doing it anyway.
Yeah.
But I don't believe it.
Right. I think he does trust, or I mean, he has his own doubts about his own view of reality. So he's basically, you know, he doubts her pain, but he doesn't know for sure whether it's just imagined. So that's why he's willing to do the procedure, because I think ultimately he believes her, believes her enough that he thinks that it's better to do the procedure rather than withhold, because I don't know what would happen. But I'm some ways I'm also guessing, because I don't know exactly what's on the minds of all these people. And in a way also, the surgery, the laser, disintegrating the little fleck of calcium is like the bloody worm spit from the shaman's mouth. It may not be real, but the awareness that it was done seems to have given her relief. So the issue of therapies that may not be real but be effective still exists. That the idea of the shaman's experience is not irrelevant to medical science today.
Could be equated to when Duncan talks about psychotherapy and the change that comes with therapy, because they tried, I think they tried figuring out, like they did research on what were the factors that affected change through psychotherapy.
Okay.
And they figured out that it was the common factors, the relationship that they had, more than the
Yes.
therapy variables or patient variables. So I think we could equate it to the common things, like the relationship, basically, more than whatever specificalities or the mode of therapy or the technique that they use.
Right. Yeah. No, I've heard that too. I've heard that from psychologists, that sometimes it's the basic relationship as people, between therapist and the healer, that's more important than the actual technique used or anything like that. Yeah, I think that's very true. And in psychotherapy, there isn't sort of the material object, though, like there is in the kidney stone. There is some kind of object out there that we wonder about the role of the psychotherapy. It's assumed to all be in the interaction, but of course then there's psychiatry. That's the neurobiology that becomes the object that we think about in relationship to that. Actually, that makes a good segue for tomorrow's readings. One of the things in the reading on healing in Africa, that chapter I assigned, that chapter 6 is called Alternative Materialities. It's about the role of materiality and how the objects and the materialities, the things of therapy are created and validated in this African culture, which is quite different from sort of the biomedical allopathic culture. It can be a little confusing to follow her explanation, but hopefully you'll get some understanding. The spirits, the ancestor spirits and the other spirits, and for these African healers, are to the Western perspective sort of imagined entities, but she shows you how they in a way have a materiality to them for the healer. And I've been reading the whole book, so you only get a part of it, but she does a very interesting job of showing how she takes seriously the relationship to the spirits of the healers, and shows how the spirits guide the healer in every step of the way, which medicine to choose, how to process the medicine. There's not this, I'm going to put the spirits aside and use my herbal traditional knowledge of plants as a person. You're always using it with the guidance of the spirits. And the things that are material are the plants, but not just the plants. Like the same plant used when you're following a spirit may have more power on the body than just the plant used with no context. So she's trying to show how actually the ideas about the materialities of things, physical things, in healing are affected by the beliefs. It's an interesting idea, like many anthropologists, you're sort of provoking, offering a provocation, considering another way of seeing the world, you can't prove this other way of seeing the world necessarily, but you're trying to understand the logic behind that.